Pastor. How are you?
Nobody's been found alive.
I'm doing great. How you are?
Good, good. Everybody, you all can say hello to him, and then we're going to get this going, okay?
Still missing.
All righty.
Good morning, Pastor.
Okay.
Hey, how are you? Thank you.
I'm great, thank you.
Okay, everybody.
All right, let them go.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard.
BAP's Jackie Quinn.
You got 5 minutes.
Experts have
Thank
warned
you.
about the structure of this building.
Okay,
years ago.
Reverend, just give me a minute. I'm trying to get
Years
this
ago, there were major flaws in the structure
last
of
of
the
my...
Champlain Tower South, and millions of dollars in renovations would be needed. But records show at a November 2018 meeting of the condo board, a Surfside building official said the structure was, quote, in very good
Okay.
shape. The mayor of Surfside says a review is underway, while several residents have already filed lawsuits. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Experts say the miserable heat wave that's baking parts of the West is worse because of human-caused climate change. Temperatures shattered records yesterday. 116 degrees in Portland, Oregon, 108 in Seattle. The National Weather Service is warning the unprecedented heat will continue for much of the week. Health officials in Los Angeles County are recommending
okay.
but not
Very good.
requiring
I got
masks be worn indoors in public
my stuff
places.
together.
They're trying to prevent
Always,
the
you
highly
understand.
transmissible Delta
And these
variant
folks
of
have
the
a staff.
coronavirus from spreading.
When
House
you see
Speaker
people
Nancy
on
Pelosi
television
proposed
moving
the
papers around,
January attack on
can
the
you hear me
US
now?
Capitol building would involve 13
I hear
House
the
members
news
and the
feed
Florida subpoena.
way over you.
Okay, good, good, good.
Got you now.
Okay, great, 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 great. Yeah, it's a lot. You know, you're trying to pull the last bit of your papers together, you know?
Oh, yes.
So I'm like, how it is. Ooh,
Yes, ma'am.
and oh my gosh, we almost knew. And I mean, always he has a really sweet disposition, but we just never really. And it's amazing he was so available even before he spoke. But as you know, you knew, you know, you didn't really do a lot of talking to him before he had to come on because you know you're trying to wrap your mind around what you got to do, right?
Correct.
Oh,
Yes, ma'am.
oh gosh. You don't want to offend anybody, but it's like, honey, I'm trying to.
I got to work.
I got to work. I'm trying to.
Right.
Yes, I'm trying to work this out right now. I'm going to have a reporter on, everybody. How you doing today? I'm going to have a reporter from ProPublica, Annie Waldman, who's going to really go through one particular community in Michigan. And she's going to show us, Pastor Thurston, how our children fell way behind. How they fell way behind. And these were children whose parents were trying, but you know, these parents are working hard, working these jobs where, you know, you're trying to figure it out from day to day to day to day. They're not making much money at all, but they're doing everything they can, and it's still not enough. Still not enough. And they passed some really onerous laws that really put our children way behind. If you couldn't read at a particular level by third and fourth grade, you had to be held back. Socially, that's really tough for children, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And we need to change the languaging on that, because when I look at it's not just private schools, prep schools. I mean, these elite schools, these kids did not miss a beat. Because all private schools are not created equal, everybody. They're not. So when you say my child's in private school, you need to find out how these kids test and all of that. Because private schools are not all created equal at all. At all. Carol out there on the left coast, Shirley in beautiful Philadelphia. My great grandmother lived there for a hot second, and then she moved to Brooklyn. And she got back to South Carolina. Carol and Janae, and Janae will be in touch. Daryl, Philip, R.A. Araya, Jewel, Philip Sharp. That's right, Yolanda, Daphne. Of course, we've got John Nichols talking to us about India Walton. She's a young African American woman. She became mayor of Buffalo, Pastor, and guess what? She's a socialist, a declared socialist. But you know, this new generation are not afraid of. They're not afraid of of labels. They just want to get things done.
That's it.
It's just like the most
But let
popular
us work.
Yeah, it's just like the most popular politicians in America. Bernie's almost 80, and Elizabeth Warren is in her 70s. You want people who are going to fight for you. It's like, don't play with me.
Yeah.
Because my circumstances are not a joke. So think about that, everybody. Something to think about. Something to think about. So we have some things to talk about today, and then we're going to go over with Dr. Shanina Knighton uh, something that she pulled up. We are the least healthiest. We're the most unhealthy. Let me put it this way. Can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world. We can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. We're going into the 4th of July weekend. It just kept it. I'm Santita Jackson, coming to you from WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station here in Chicago. Waves for Air America, and AM 950 Radio, my home to the north in Minneapolis, St. Paul, sending you all much love. Of course, that was Sound of Blackness from Minneapolis. That's right, the home of Prince and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And of course, my beloved Gary Hines. Thank him so much for letting us use his music. Everybody, I want you to call me or text me at 773 773 763 9278. GWC Injury Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text. But I want to hear your voices today. 773 9278. And meet Melissa and Big Bree and Carol Crowley and Andre and Samantha. Carol Soskin from the left coast. Oh my goodness. My Morning Stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson and Friends page over here on Facebook. And of course, we're streaming on WCPT 820's Facebook page. So everybody, all of my Morning Stars, please like and share, if you will. Like and share right now, or like and share, like and share. I need you to like and share. Janae, Daryl, and Philip. And what are we going to be talking about today? Well, that I thought you all wanted to dig down into, because I could see your surprise yesterday. America, the United States, is the most unhealthy industrialized nation on earth. We spend more money than anyone else. Why are we the most unhealthy? And how does that impact us? I mean, something that we've really got to dig down on. That's part of the reason that COVID-19 has been so devastating. Our baseline health is so poor. And then we're going to be talking about what happened up in Michigan and what happened to our children in this lost year, as they call it. And it's really been a couple of years. We're going to look at a community, a Black community in Michigan that suffered greatly. Our children have been trying to learn. They didn't have access to the internet. Annie Waldman of ProPublica is going to look at what happened in the lost year. They had a young woman who actually one of our parents, a tremendous teacher. She was a top student, and she went back to school specifically to teach in that community. And even as she has congestive heart failure, very young woman, and she just really mounted quite the fight to save our children. And we're going to talk about what happened to these kids and what's happening to our children, because what's happened there is happening all over the country, not just to Black children, but to poor white children, brown children, everybody. Unless you were in really an elite situation, our children took hits, really took hits. And during this pandemic. So we're going to talk about that. And of course, John Nichols is going to speak about India Walton. Who is she? She's the young Black woman who won the mayor's race in Buffalo, New York. And she's a socialist. Can't wait to talk about that. Morning Stars, please like and share, everybody. Like and share on the Santita Jackson Show. Let's get through some of these headlines so we can get some good news from Pastor Stephen Thurston. Chicago will have a high of 83 degrees. Thunderstorms. I can feel the mugginess already. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 84 degrees. Scattered showers. The NASDAQ closed up 140 points. The Dow closed down 150 points. The S&P 500 closed up 9 points. Today, the Twins and the White Sox will will face off. The Cubs were blown out by the Brewers. Oh my gosh, 14-4, everybody. And the White Sox will, of course, they'll be playing the Twins. It's going to be a very, very exciting day. And perhaps the Cubs will absolve themselves when they play the Brewers today. And the Clippers, well, they were triumphant over the Suns. 116-102. Investigators are on the scene in Surfside, Florida, looking at the condominium collapse, trying to figure out how and why a portion of the building came down. A 6-person team of scientists, structural engineers, and geotechnical engineers from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Well, they are conducting a preliminary investigation of the building's materials, history, and applicable housing. There are 11 persons who have been found dead. And 150 who are still missing. We want to know what's happening. They are all of the coastal cities all around the country looking at these high-rise buildings. They saw cracked concrete, standing water, days in the basement of this condominium just before the collapse. It turns out that the Miami Herald is reporting that the Miami area condo that collapsed skirted local codes with the penthouse. They played fast and loose with that place. And so now people are also asking about climate change. What role did climate change play in this disaster? Is it sinking? Is Miami sinking? Is the rising water, did that have an impact? All of that. As many of us who live near water are now trying to ask questions about where we live. Like me. Yeah, everybody in Chicago, because a lot of Chicago's landfill, everybody. The threat of the Delta variant has some health officials rethinking COVID-19 measures, even among vaccinated people. Experts have said vaccines like those from Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech provide high amounts of protection against the variant, but some warn breakthroughs could become more likely if the virus becomes more prevalent. I'm going to be asking Dr. Shanina Knighton about that. The Supreme Court left in place a decision that allowed a transgender student to use the bathroom that corresponded to his gender identity. It is a victory for the LGBTQ community, which worried the conservative leaning High Court would reverse the lower court's decision. The case originated in Virginia, and the ruling covers several states, which means students in those states can use the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. What do you think about that, everybody? I'm wondering how that is going to play out on a practical level. What do you think, everybody? 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Well, surprise, surprise. In the months since President Trump left office, news audiences have plunged dramatically. This, according to Axios. And publishers who rely on partisan warfare have taken an especially big hit. Wow. Did you know that? Web traffic, social media engagement, and app user sessions suggest that while the entire news industry, including Axios, they self-reported, is experiencing a drop, right-wing outlets are seeing some of the biggest plunges. Wow. A group of far-right outlets, including Newsmax and The Federalist, saw aggregate traffic drop 44%, for example, everybody. Something to think about. I think people want something more fair and balanced, if you will. No reconciliation bill, no deal. That is what Senator Sanders is saying. Either you give us everything that we asked for, or you get no deal in this infrastructure deal. And it turns out, in a blow to the GOP narrative, they cut jobless benefits. Guess what? People still not coming back to work. I guess people want, they don't want subsistence wages. They want prosperity wages. How about that? The world that we're coming back to in 2021 is very different than the world we left in 2020. The teaching pastor of Salem Baptist Church, the House of Hope, the author of Mirror Moments, giving us some good news today, Pastor Stephen Thurston II. How are you today?
I'm doing amazing, Santita. Always glad to be with you.
Always a joy to be with you. Give us some good news as we watch this death toll climb in Surfside, Florida. I think we are all feeling quite vulnerable.
Yeah, such a sad scenario that's happened there. I was talking to some individuals the other day about the context of the relationships that many of us find ourselves in. And when I look back from a historical lens, I discovered that for the past 200 years or so, reciprocity has been the base of human cooperation. The implicit or explicit mantra of humanity seemingly has been, if you solve my need, I'll solve yours. And as a result, we've learned to settle for transactional forms of relationships and love. And this can explain why random acts of kindness towards us can feel weird for both the giver and the receiver. I actually had this experience last night. Somebody tried to do something for me, and I was like, nah, that's okay. I'll pass. You don't have to do that. Because something on the inside of me was saying, I didn't earn it. I don't deserve it. And now I might even feel subconsciously, at least, indebted to you for trying to give this to me. And they were totally genuine. No strings were attached. But I've just kind of noticed my mindset regarding receiving things from people. And because we view life and relationships through a transactional lens, receiving the grace and the kindness that's offered to us from others can often feel foreign. One of the key issues with transactional relationships is that when the transaction is over, the relationship actually has no reason to exist. This is a conundrum that I face again in another aspect of my life with the consulting firm that I run. Because if I give too little, I won't satisfy my customers' needs. But if I give too much and solve their need, I become useless. And now I'm back on the hunt for a next contract. And whether this is in your business life, your personal life, transactional relationships aren't built to last and aren't built for growth. The two biggest threats to these type relationships are change and independence. And the real truth of transactional relationships is that you're actually investing in the other party's stagnation. That's the only way to create the need for the relationship to continue. Well, Santita, the good news is that we can course correct from transactional to relational relationships. And here's how. 3 steps that we can all engage in. Number 1, be real. It's essential that we focus on building meaningful connections. When people are present and true, you can feel it. It creates a natural form of trust that can be used to build those meaningful connections. And number 2, shift your focus. We have to move from how can this relationship benefit me to how can I benefit the relationship. We've got to make the sum greater than the parts. And then number 3, eliminate expectations. I know that sounds weird, but here's what I mean by that. Expectations kill depth and add breadth to a relationship. And when we keep tabs on what we've done for others and get emotional when they don't do the same, we're being transactional. We have to stop that. We've got to move to the place where we do things for each other and with each other for no reason. The only expectations that you should have are for yourself. Number 1, to be present. Number 2, to give what you can when you can. And number 3, to receive with appreciation if someone gives to you. And as we move through life and lead our lives with the intention to give in our relationships without expecting something in return, we'll experience a happier, less anxious life and more relational versus transactional relationships in our lives.
Amen to that. Because maybe, we've capitalized relationships, right?
Yeah.
It's not giving. My father talks about that all the time. He said, if it's a gift, you give and you go on. Now, are we giving or are we exchanging chits? Really, because that's harmful. And it bleeds into our personal relationships. Now we do credit checks, not character checks, right? Want to know how much money do you have? And no, wait a minute, not will you be with me when I'm sick? That with all your friends, all of that. Something to think about, Pastor. Something to think about. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Of course, he's got the book Mirror Moments, which will help you take a look at yourself, which is something I think that we need to do. Everybody, get the book Mirror Moments. Mirror Moments. How can we pick that up, Pastor Thurston?
StephenJThurston.com, and that's Stephen with the PH.
Okay, StephenJThurston.com. All right, everybody. Mirror moments. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. And I want all of my morning stars, please like and share, like and share, like and share. You too, Pastor Thurston, like and share this broadcast, the Santita Jackson Show. You know, we've got one of our favorites here. Uh, Dr. Shanina Knighton, brilliant scholar, research scholar at Case Western Reserve University. She is a registered nurse and she does something really, really special. She's an infection preventionist. That's a highly specialized um, line of work, preventing infections. You know, our parents often told us, Dr. Knighton, that, you know, what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, that's what she does. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, your family here. You know what? Before we get into what we're going to be talking about at the bottom of the hour, which is the lack of health, really how sick Americans are and what we can do about it. I read a very interesting survey that showed that uh, the pandemic is over, at least according to 57% of Republicans. Republicans are far more likely than Democrats to say the coronavirus pandemic is over. But, you know, to be honest with you, I'm seeing a lot of people. I don't know what their political affiliations are or their party affiliations are. I don't know, but they're acting like it's over. When I was in the airport a couple of weeks ago, I said, wow. Even though a lot of, you know, the breakfast places were not open and some, you know, when I got back to O'Hare, a lot of stuff was open. You know, it was almost as if it was back to normal. Some people were masked, other people were not. 62% of people, according to this survey, say that, well, life has gone back somewhat to normal. 54% claim their lives are now entirely undisrupted by the pandemic. 40% do not expect their lives will ever go back to normal. What do you think about that? I mean, is the pandemic over, Dr. Knighton?
So we don't consider it to be, so I was going to say the term pandemic in itself means that we're talking about a disease that has unexpectedly spread across multiple countries. Okay. What this is believed to be at this point is endemic. Endemic meaning that coronavirus is going to be with us for some time now. And we're at a place now of figuring out what is going to be the number of expected cases per year. Same way with flu. So with flu, it is sad. But anytime you say, oh, our flu deaths, our flu cases are higher than normal, but you have thousands and thousands of people that are being infected every year and dying every year, it's that we've come to accept it as a norm, that certain people are going to be infected and that they're going to die. To me, the question always comes is that ethical? Because does it mean that we've given up? Or is it ethical because this is just how life works? And I think that is one of the challenging questions that many people are kind of grappling at, meaning that you do, like we're all human beings and we're all individuals. And so how you mentioned, you know, even in that survey, how some people are saying, oh, yeah, life is back to normal. That is some people's way of coping with it. You have others who they've lost loved ones. They know people that were infected. They may have been infected themselves. We have to remember that this is people's lived experience, and that lived experience is going to stay with them, especially if it was something traumatic. I mean, if you were one of those individuals that got COVID-19 and when you were breathing in and out and your chest felt like glass, then that's going to stick with you because you're still likely going to have like the residual effects of that. Some people had side effects. Some people are still suffering with that residual. As they continue to suffer with the residual side effects of COVID, it's very hard to erase it from the mind when they know that it's still lingering within their bodies. So it is a complicated question. I say endemic, meaning that, yes, it's going to be with us some time now. The way that measures and things are being rolled back, I am concerned. I've always said that America was given a crash course in infection prevention, but that infection prevention has always needed to be a part of our daily lives, and it hasn't been. Prior to this pandemic, I could go inside of a grocery store and not see a hand sanitizer dispenser. I can go inside of a restaurant, someplace where I needed to eat, and the only place to clean my hands was going to be in the bathroom. The same thing with the department store. Same thing when you're at the airport, like the escalator, and everyone's getting on the escalator or the elevator, or everyone has to go through pre-check. But typically there was no hand sanitizer stations the minute that you left pre-check or TSA, rather. You would get out of TSA, and then they touch your card, they touch your belongings, they touch a lot of other people's belongings. They have gloves, you don't. So then it's like you leave and you don't clean your hands. So I'm seeing a lot of things that have changed, and I do not think that we'll ever return to how we were before. I think that there are reminders in regards to hand hygiene that are now placed within our environmental settings, and this is not something that I've seen before.
Everybody, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. And I want to talk with you about something that Dr. Knighton brought into our consciousness yesterday that was surprising to a lot of us. Did you know that we are the unhealthiest industrialized non-European country in the world? We spend more money on health care than anybody, and yet we're the sickest. How does that work? Now, we've been told that a universal single-payer system is too expensive, but the system we have is very expensive, among the most expensive in the world, and it's not working for us. So how did we get here? How and why are we so sick? And that's something that ought to be of concern to all of us, because we're in the midst of this pandemic that is now endemic, and we need to be healthy. Even if you get COVID-19, more likely than not, you will survive it. It has a very low mortality rate. But the problem that you got is that you don't want the disease because it can bring on lasting, devastating consequences to you. So, you got to be careful. We have to be careful, and we need to talk about this, everybody. Things that we didn't think about before, we're thinking about now. Now, many of us, I got on the plane, and this woman was wiping down the seat with her Dr. Knighton with her, what is it? Alcohol. No, she had alcohol isopropyl, honey. She was wiping them down. I said, I am not mad at you, but I had plastic. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And yes, I did send those clothes to the dry cleaners as soon as I got home. So it's something to think about, everybody. Why are we so unhealthy? Let's talk about that on the Santita Jackson Show. Why are Americans so unhealthy? You think that you're healthier than just about everybody on earth? No, we're not. No, we're not. We're at the bottom. At the bottom. Why is that? And how can we get out of it? And we'll be talking about what happened to our children. What happened with our children during this pandemic with education? They lost a lot of ground, and they deserve much better than that. More of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Doctor, how are you? About to call you Dr. Deb. Girl, it's just it's just too much. Too many things on my mind. Too many things on my mind. But how are you? Oh, wow.
Good. Oh my God, that Reverend was so amazing. And when I tell you everything that he described, like that's how I live. Oh my gosh, like it was so phenomenal.
Well, that's why I wanted him on, because there's some people. I think that we need to. My father's mother in particular would not. She began the day with prayer. And my pastor, Reverend Clay Evans, may he rest in peace. Every time you went to speak with him, he started the conversation in prayer and he ended it in prayer. So even if you went to him, for counseling, something was really bothering you, you were mad and you were ready to vent, prayer took the edge off of all of that. You know what I mean? And I think that in this, look at this this study that shows that the media's ratings have plunged significantly since President Trump has left office. Hyper-partisan media, they've lost a lot of ground. Well, they've lost a lot of viewers, but then, when President Trump, had his rally this weekend, he had 2 million viewers. So, it's not that he's lost ground. I mean, that's just real. Um, uh,
Right.
yeah, I think people are looking for some peace. He hasn't lost ground, but a lot of the anger and whatnot that's driving the conversation, it's just not working for people anymore. At least I hope that that's the case, because I think we got to do something different, because what we're doing now
I'm
is,
telling you. Yeah.
the anger and whatnot that's driving everything.
It was actually amazing. Penn State did an amazing study not too long ago, and it was actually talking about the fact that this information came from the news early on in the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And talked about like just the fear that was created. And so I thought it was interesting that they studied people and found that correlation to be the case, and I had a personal experience of the fear mongering that happened because I was trying to have a reporter tell me like, oh, well, we need these, he said we needed the N95 mask. And what I was explaining to him is the particles of COVID and the particles of TB are something different. And at that mask, especially if it's not used correctly by the public, I'm like, it's not going to matter if they have it or not. I said, because with a N95 mask, you got to undergo a fit test. And if you don't undergo a fit test and it don't properly fit your mouth and nose, like you can't assume because you got a big face that it's going to fit. Like it's about the nose and the mouth area. And so when I was trying to express that to him, he wasn't trying to hear it. He literally cut my segment. I spent maybe about 25, 30 minutes talking to this man. He cut my segment down to 30 seconds because I told him. He was like, well, it says it right here that it protects against coronavirus. I said, okay, let me see the piece of paper. I said, the CDC says it. I said, I'll say it. I knew it didn't say it, but I just wanted to like literally just see what he was going to say. So when he showed me that piece of paper, I said, that's not what that says. He didn't think I was going to read.
Oh, boy.
But I actually had that happen to me. And so that's why I say, like, you'd be surprised. It does come down to sometimes people just wanting a good story.
Oh. And, we're talking about people's health here. It's like, what are you doing? This is not the way this is supposed to go. No. This is health. This is health. This is health. This is not something you play with. No, no, no.
Change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world. This is the Santita Jackson Show. War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. Let's talk about why Americans are so sick. Later on in the show, we'll have John Nichols talking about this African-American who's now the mayor of the second largest, she will be when she's sworn in, the second largest city in New York, Buffalo. And she's a declared socialist. How did she win? India Walton. And then Annie Waldman from ProPublica is going to be talking with us about how much ground our children lost in this pandemic in school. So many poor children, black children, brown children. We haven't even talked about poor white children don't have access to the internet. How did that impact them and their education outcomes profoundly, particularly in Michigan, where they have laws that really push back against these children who don't have access to the best education. Well, the best education resources. Let's not beat up on the teachers because they're doing the best that they can. Everybody's doing the best that they can, but some people get the resources to succeed, others do not. So stay tuned for that discussion that we're going to have at the top of the hour. But right now, we're talking about the United States coming in last once more on health. The Commonwealth Fund ranks industrialized nations. They rank nations all over the world. They want to talk to you about your health, and they survey tens of thousands of adults from Australia, Britain. I mean, really, the Western nations. Australia, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States. And it found 43% of low-income Americans went without medical care because of costs. That's 43%, everybody. In other countries, those rates get this range from 8% in Britain to 31% in Switzerland. In these Western nations, you are not denied health care because you don't have any money. But in the United States, absolutely. And as a result, we are the sickest. There are a lot of factors that indicate that we are the sickest of these non-European, westernized, so-called developed nations. And so Dr. Shanita Knighton brought that to our attention yesterday, and I wanted to speak to that because so much of our health in this pandemic, so much of our health outcomes with respect to COVID-19 depends upon how healthy we are. And it turns out from jump, Americans are sick. Dr. Knighton.
Good morning.
What
So
is
thank you
the deal
so
here?
much for having me. So it's interesting because I was going to say, I know we talked about, it's interesting, I would say, with the human brain, right?
Mm.
So we tend to not connect the dots when it comes to, let's say, our food, when it comes to stress, and when it comes to infections. What we don't realize is that, let's say we are on the brink of having a cold, but we're eating unhealthy food, or we're stressed out. Typically, that's what sends our body into a inflammatory state that causes us to be sick. It's the same thing with infections. Sadly enough, like when we think about what it is that we're eating and we're saying to ourselves, and it's not to put certain foods on a chopping block today, but we don't think about, let's say, food coloring. We don't think about additives in our food when we're saying, okay, I'm thinking about this particular medicine or this particular food to make me better. There are options out there that we can think about that doesn't have all of the preservatives and additives, but it's not something that we think about because we've had our go-to foods and our go-to solutions for so long. I'm bringing that up because when we look at not only just this pandemic, when we're thinking about other things such as chronic conditions, such as individuals that may have high blood pressure, they may have diabetes, they may be obese. They've been living with these conditions for so long. Asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is called COPD, congestive heart failure. The United States has a high population of these chronic conditions, and that is just naming a few. The list goes on and on and on. And so cancer, which is more so of a terminal illness, but we still have individuals that are suffering from that we don't think about health in a matter of which we should, based off of what it is that we're consuming and based off of the stress. So when I see studies that come up and, I see polls that are saying that we are dead last when it comes to our healthcare system, the one thing that rings a bell to me is accountability. And that is we tend to think that the healthcare system is there to take care of us. And sometimes for many, that leads to a neglect of them caring for themselves. I can speak to that because I take care of patients. I've taken care of patients. I know what it was like for, them to come in often with the same diagnosis, and I just sent them home with a treatment plan. And then what happens is life hits them, and they tend to not care about their health as much until an infection sits in, until, they're back and they've had a flare-up of their chronic disease, such as having, a breathing exacerbation, meaning that they have trouble breathing as a result of something else. So you look at these things and you say to yourself, if COVID-19 is an infectious disease that affects the respiratory or attacks the respiratory system, we already had individuals that are compromised even before the pandemic. that may have not been getting proper exercise, had proper diet, or thinking about health in a matter of how do I improve the way that my lungs function? How do I improve the way that my heart functions? So it does not, unfortunately, surprise me that we are the sickest in regards to what it is that we consume and our habits and how we view health and our health system.
We're talking with Dr. Shanina Knighton, resident scholar. She's an RN, but she is also a PhD, and she's an infection preventionist. She's at Case Western Reserve University. We have the privilege of speaking with her today about our health with respect to COVID-19, this pandemic we're in, and just in regular times, everybody. These studies show that America has the highest rate of death by violence by a stunning margin. That is all of the so-called developed nations, the Western nations, and Japan has been included in that. The highest rate of death by car accident, the highest chance that a child will die before the age of 5, the highest chance that a child will die before the age of 5, the second highest rate of death by heart disease, the second highest rate of death by lung disease, the highest teen pregnancy rate, the highest rate of women dying due to complications from pregnancy and childbirth. It is stunning that we are dying in the United States, that our children, our babies aren't making it to 5. Violence, car accidents, having a baby. What is going on? Is that the hospital system? Is it us? What is going on, Dr. Knighton? And should we be concerned about this?
We should be concerned, but it's more so of a concern for ourselves individually and the ones that we're around. The healthcare system is complicated. It really is. And if you've ever seen a system of where everything doesn't work in tandem, so they're still working on technology, within a healthcare system and across healthcare systems to be able to talk. So it means that if I go into one healthcare facility and I've been seen there for 20 years, I can walk into another system and they may not be ready to pick up on my level of care, which means that they may start my treatment plan over and they may take my treatment down another road, which means that instead of me progressing on that same train, I've now had to shift my care. So that's one issue that we have. The other issue is that, there is a disparity when it comes to cultural differences inside of healthcare facilities. This is something that's been studied greatly. I can say me personally, I have experienced it as a patient, even before becoming a nurse. I've had experiences of where I wasn't listened to, by my provider. I've had situations of where I knew something didn't feel right and couldn't describe it, and someone was very quick to hand me a medicine instead of get to the root of the problem. And that leads to someone having to go back continuously to get care. I've had to be an advocate for family members and friends and strangers at times because the care that they were receiving was subpar, and I thought that maybe they needed their options and that they needed to advocate for themselves because there are things that people don't know. When they talk about the white coat syndrome, that is real. When people get nervous about being around, individuals in white coats, and it may cause anxiety. People, when they go inside of facilities, look at care different. Our system has been so reactive, meaning that, we'll take care of you after you get sick, opposed to proactive, meaning that we're going to help you to prevent from getting sick. And we're seeing a little bit of our shift for our healthcare system in doing that, meaning that there are advertisements now for mammograms. There are screenings for cancers. There are certain things that people can do, but the problem is access. And Dr. Deb isn't here today, but she talks about that all the time. So when we talk about being the sickest, when we talk about, everything else that is going on, we cannot talk about that without talking about inequity. The fact that even with healthcare insurance, someone can have healthcare insurance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we all aren't a penny away from poverty. So if I have an emergency department visit and that's going to be my medical bill, and that comes up unexpectedly, how does that fit into the rest of my finances?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm seeing is, and this is even true again in my family, where individuals will choose going to work over their health. They'll actually choose going without their medications because the medications are too expensive, because they say, you know what, I'm just going to deal with it as much as I can because they can't afford the medications. So in a system that encourages, work, that encourages us to do so many other things, I have seen with my very own eyes the ability for individuals to not prioritize their health because they need to keep their job. I've seen them prioritize not taking care of themselves, talking about a mother, just to make sure that their kids don't go without. When we talk about, infant mortality rates, when we talk about women that have complications in regards to pregnancy, prenatal visits are so important because you have someone that is at least telling you about how to prepare for that child that is coming. So it's more than just checking on the child. It's helping you to prepare. And there's so many women that go without those visits. So unfortunately, the way that our system is set up, it doesn't prepare us, to be better the way that we do. And this is why we have to be accountable and start trying somewhere for, something and somewhere for ourselves.
I think we have to push for a different healthcare system, a healthcare system, not a health scare system, and a health system. Oh, come on, because we've engaged in a lot of fear porn, and the discussion even around this pandemic has not been empowering. We've not told people the things that they need to do in addition to, if you get the vaccine. In addition to that, the vaccine. I'm not here to have that discussion today. What I will tell you though is that you do need to build up your baseline health. I know that. That. I mean, you help me with that because that's my observation, and I don't see that happening.
No, I agree. It's to stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And I do agree with you. I can probably, if any, count on one hand how many advertisements. So we've had plenty of commercials saying, get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get tested, get tested, get tested. But not one saying, oh, make sure you're eating your fruits and your vegetables so you can, build up your immune system should you encounter COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, make sure you're building up your immune system with fruits and vegetables and foods that boost your immune system and your T cells. So that way, if you have COVID, then you'll have a better chance of surviving it. I'm not saying that these things cure it, but these things going inside of our body helps it instead of hurting it. And so these are conversations that are not had as often as they need to. But it's something that whether we're talking about COVID or we're talking about the next superbug that may come, the next pandemic that may come, it's a concept of staying ready so you don't have to get ready. It's a concept that everyone has had that experience where they've gone out to eat dinner and the next day they woke up and it's that itch in their throat. You can't ignore that itch in your throat. Like, you have to start saying, you know what? My body feels like it's getting rid of some inflammation or it's possibly coming down with the cold. I need to listen to my body and make sure that I'm going to put some proper things in it to boost up my immune system. Maybe that means I need to go get some foods rich in vitamin C or, that's going to help me to boost my T cells. But I feel that itch in my throat and I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to fix it before it becomes a full cold or something else. And that is the thing that I'm mentioning, meaning that what can we do to not have to rely heavily on the healthcare system? The healthcare system is supposed to be a tool in our toolbox. It's not supposed to be our health. We're supposed to be the CEOs of our own health. And so what that requires is an understanding that, yes, the information that they give us about the food pyramid, that's all baseline information. But every individual is different. And we have to listen to our bodies more and say, you know what? I ate this particular food, or I drank this item, or I did this particular exercise. This works for me and this doesn't. and to know that and be an advocate for yourself. So it's the most important thing that someone can do. We have to think about it. We were waiting on vaccines. We were waiting on tests. But COVID was still running rampant. And so what were people doing during that time? And you would hope that it was saying, you know what, I need to make sure that I'm exercising. I need to make sure that I'm not eating the unhealthy foods. I need to make sure that if I have these chronic conditions, that I'm taking care of them because I want to make sure that I'm not putting myself at further risk. And so these are the conversations that we have to have because, unfortunately, yes, with our diets, with our lifestyle habits, we are the sickest country. And at some point, we have to become more accountable for our health and realize that your nurses, your doctors, your healthcare providers, they are there to help you, not to necessarily control your health. And so we have to get that out of our mindset.
You know, and we need to work on policies that will help us with health care. The fact is, the primary driver of, one of the primary drivers, rather, of bankruptcies in this country are your health care costs, even with the Affordable Care Act, and we absolutely needed that, and I applaud it. We have to go further. That was a significant first step. That having been said, we need a system where you don't go broke. Copays will kill you, Dr. Knighton. It will just absolutely they'll take you under. And that is, people are not just choosing, folks don't have a choice. I can afford to do this and do that. Who is telling me that there are a lot of other people who want your job. That's very real. That's happening to a lot of people. A lot of people being very gently threatened, to keep their jobs. I know you want this. You know you need this. They're cutting off. They're not enhancing the unemployment benefits. Oh no, people are cruel. They're real mean, and they're cracking a whip. Slavery is not over.
But you know
The
what?
name has just changed.
Yes, but I will tell you this. What's so sad is the fact that our health care benefits are attached to employment. And I have to remind people to be kind because it was, these people are getting X amount of dollars per month for unemployment. And I was saying to them, do you know that, like, literally, if their job fires them, they're going to get that COBRA package in the mail, which is going to not only include the amount that person was paying for insurance while working for that employer, they're going to have now the employer's portion of what was being paid for that insurance. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about COBRA asking people to pay anywhere, depending on if you're a family or individual. You being told now that you got to pay somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 to be able to keep the same health care insurance plan that you have with your employer. But now because you don't have your employer, that's how much they want you to pay per month. Mm-hmm. So if you literally are paying $3,000 just for your health care insurance to be able to sustain it and keep it because you don't have that job, that's being eaten up by all of the unemployment. So how can you really take care of yourself in the manner that you need to if it's attached to each other? And so it's a tough situation for individuals to be in, but I don't think that it's something that people think about when we're talking about health care. The other piece of it, when we talk about the sickest country, Santita, that many don't think about. So my research is on self-management regarding infection prevention. And so when I'm talking about infection prevention, self-management, I'm talking about patients inside of hospitals making sure that they are aware that healthcare-associated infections, which there are over 2 million a year and nearly 100,000 people die in hospitals, okay? To make sure that people understand and are aware that healthcare-associated infections exist, meaning that you can go to the hospital with one thing and end up with another, and making sure that they're aware of the things that they should be doing to keep themselves safe. It is very perplexing to me that in our healthcare systems, unlike Australia, unlike places in the UK, they actually have mechanisms in place for their bed-bound patients to clean their hands, and they also make sure that individuals that can get up and walk are being told to clean their hands as well. So we're a place where patients are the sickest and overexposed to infections. Right here in the very United States, where we can find now hand sanitizer dispensers at grocery stores and at gas stations, you do not have accessible ones that are ready for patients to be able to use. If a patient can't get out of bed, how will they make it to the wall? How will they make it outside of the room to be able to clean their hands? And this is after their call lights, their poles, everything is touched by other healthcare providers, which means that it can harbor harmful germs. And so it's these little things that we don't think about when it comes to stopping the cycle of infection, either through cleaning. Yes, we have healthcare worker hand hygiene, but what about patients? And this again goes back into my conversation about more accountability.
Dr. Shanina Knighton, everybody, infection preventionist. Remember, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Registered nurse, PhD, resident scholar at Case Western Reserve University. We are talking about how we can increase our health. It doesn't mean much to you until that doctor takes a long time to get back to that office when you take that visit. You know, when you get that, when the doctor says, well, when the doctor sits down as opposed to standing up, that's happened to me before. And like, well, we need to talk. Oh boy, you want to make sure that you are as healthy as you can be. I've got about a minute, Dr. Knighton. What do you want people to have as their takeaway today? Because in fact, D. Ray Jones says on Saturday, I don't know where you are, D. Please let me know where you are. D. Ray Jones said the entire baseball team in her town got the Delta variant uh, of the COVID virus, and they're out for the entire season. Wow. I mean, and we see a lot of people
Wow.
who've gotten vaccinated, and these breakthrough viruses are breaking through. What are we not doing? 1 minute.
I encourage everyone to be conscious of your hand hygiene. So right now we know that only 3 to 6% of Americans clean their hands correctly. I encourage you, make sure that if you are taking the 25 seconds, that you are cleaning your hands, making sure you're getting in between where the thumb meets the hands, making sure that you're getting your fingernails. If you are a woman or a man that have long fingernails or plastic fingernails, make sure that you are using a toothbrush to scrub up under your nails in your cleaning hands mechanism. It is very important because dirt and harmful germs gets trapped up under there. That is the first line of defense for you, especially when out in public. It is also, too, with hand hygiene, being conscious of the things that you encounter. If you're going to be out in grocery stores, if you're going to be out in public spaces, think about the many times that someone else may have touched the elevator button or touched the escalator or sat on a particular surface and rested their hands on an armchair.
Well,
Think
no,
about those things.
that's going to have to be it.
Think about.
Think about it. You know, you'll be back tomorrow because we're going to talk about what we need to think about. Let's talk about education, everybody, on the Santita Jackson Show. What did our children lose in this pandemic? Back in just a minute.
Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am breathing for all of the people.
You have so much information, Dr. Knighton. I mean, I've always used a toothbrush, but now you got me scrubbing. I'm, I'm turning into my grandmother Gertrude. Oh my gosh. I mean, and we would laugh that she was a germaphobe. But she worked in the hospital. She worked in food services, everybody. She would be the lady who'd bring your food to you, but she became, and then my aunt went and got a master's in nutrition. And so she went on and did that work too. And they're both my grandmother who's passed on, but my aunt Connie is very, very, very fastidious about every morsel of food that she eats. Do you hear me? And every speck of dirt that she sees. Do you hear me? I mean,
I don't blame her.
ooh, ooh, ooh. Everything's in plastic. and everything gets clean. Oh, girl, it's a lot. But you know what? Now she's a prophetess. I don't know what to say, but tomorrow, we're going to talk about a lot more. And thank you so much for being with us today, everybody. Dr. Deb, it's been her birthday week, and she'll be back with us in a few days. But Dr. Knighton, she's family. She said, "Oh, hey, don't worry about it. We're going, you and Dr. Knighton carry it, and we're doing it. How about that?" I love you, Dr. Knighton. Is there anything you want to say to everybody
I love
before?
you too.
Oh, you're my girl. Is there anything you want to say to people with this Delta variant? You see, D. Ray Jones. Um, she said in her town, the whole baseball team got this Delta variant. What? And they're out for the season.
Yes.
That is crazy.
We don't know how many variants there are. We don't know how well the vaccine
Hey, Santita,
protect us against all of these other variants. We do know that it will help to decrease the symptoms that you may have, thus preventing hospitalization or death. But my thing is stay ready so you don't have to get ready, because, again, while we know that COVID-19 is going to be with us for some time now, meaning that it'll be endemic, we are not sure what kind of path this thing is going to take. And because we do not understand that, prevention is better than treatment. And so you want to make sure that you are preventing it, that you're not becoming so comfortable that you are exposed to that variant, because that may be the very thing that takes you out, especially if you had COVID previously and it has already wreaked havoc on your healthcare system.
Oh, hold on one second.
Stay ready, continue.
Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Stay right there. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. Dylan?
Okay.
Dylan? Mr. Althoff? Okay, I thought he was going to say something else. Okay. Well, no, but see, I would think that, and one would think that the vaccines, that these shots would give you extra protection against these variants, because now every time we hear a variant, it's, it really makes you anxious. Well, wait a minute, you're saying that everybody's getting vaccinated. I thought that's what this was for.
It builds up a stronger tolerance, unfortunately. And I think that's the thing that we don't think about, is that, even with flu, right? Like, the strains keep changing every year. So that's a perfect example of evolution. And I'll ask the person and I'll say, "Are you the same person that you were last year?" And they'll say, "No, I'm not." And I'm like, exactly. I said, and so you have to, or not even last year, yesterday.
Absolutely.
We all are changing constantly. So these bugs are always changing constantly. And I think, if we understand that and we grow to understand that, then we stop thinking that it'll stay stagnant. And so we're not sure. The goal is we hope that it's going to fizzle out and stop making all these different variations. And that's part of the purpose of the vaccine, was so that way the variation can stop. Because if everybody has
Santita.
level.
Hold on one second. I'm sorry. Yes?
Okay.
Two things. The guest for this hour, Ms. Waldman, is here.
Very good.
There's another caller, and then Matt asked me to ask you, do you need any time off on the 4th?
But an email.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll let him know.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want me to put the other guest on?
Oh, let me say hello. And remember, I'm old enough for your mom, Mr. Althoff. Okay.
Do you want me to?
Yes, no, please bring her up so that we can get the sound right, okay? It's raining like crazy outside now. Ms. Waldman?
Yes.
How are you?
Hi. I'm great. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on.
No, thank you. Please bring her up just a tinch. Okay, Ms. Waldman, could I hear you?
Yeah. How does this sound? Is it better?
Oh, yes, it's not you. This is something that has to be controlled by the station. But I've got Dr. Shanita Knighton, who's going to be leaving us shortly. She is an infection preventionist, RN. If you ever want some great medical advice, she's a resident scholar at Case Western Reserve University. She's a registered nurse and a PhD, and she's an infection preventionist, which is a very specialized area. And we have not heard enough about infection preventionists in this pandemic. What
Couldn't agree more.
you should be doing to protect yourself. And that's what she does. Even as she has told us about how we wash our hands, it's been stunning. Because you're like, wait a minute,
Absolutely.
you should be washing your hands for almost 30 seconds. Should the water be hot or cold, Dr. Nina?
Um, it, it can be warm.
Doesn't need to
Like
be
warm water is
smoking hot.
any friction on the hands is good. So that's the thing. Somebody may say hot, cold, warm. You might have a preference for warm, but I'm telling you, like, water and soap does wonders regardless of the temperature. Like, it's the friction
30 seconds.
and the proper hand mechanisms that are needed.
Well, I'm going to have to let you go now on that. And thank you for that, because I use smoking hot water, just so that you know. Yes. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, thank you, Ms. Waldman. And call me Santita, please. Yeah.
Okay,
No.
great.
No.
Call me Annie.
Okay, thank you very much. Um, yeah, it's hot. It's hot, everybody. I'm not playing. Because that's how my grandmama's taught me, So there we go. So stand by. We're going to talk about what happened with our children.
Change the world, change the world, change the world. Can change the world, we can change the world, change the world. This is the Santita Jackson Show. War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. Can you believe we are on the summer? That's right, 4th of July weekend. I want you to stay tuned to WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, all weekend long. It's going to be great. Going to have some great programming for you. And AM 950 Radio, my home to the north in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I want you to call me. I want to hear your voices. 773-763-WCPT. 763-9278. 773-763-9278. I understand I have a call. I'm going to come to you shortly, but I want to hear from you, and I want you to join my Morning Stars on the Santita Jackson and Friends page right over here, and on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Thank you, Marnie, for setting that up. And so more and more of you are liking and subscribing. Please continue to do that. And meet me on Instagram, Santita Jackson IG, and on Twitter at Santita J, And of course, we're streaming live on WCPT 820. And of course, people listening to us, not just on the radio, but on WCPT820.com. So please stay tuned. We're going to be talking with John Nichols at the bottom of the hour, Annie Waldman of ProPublica, about what our children missed, held back inside a lost school year. But let's get some of these headlines out the way so we can speak with Annie Waldman, everybody. Chicago will have a high of 83 degrees. It is storming right now, thunderstorms. Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, 84 degrees, showers. The NASDAQ closed up 140 points yesterday. The Dow closed down 150 points. The S&P 500 closed up 9 points. The Twins versus the White Sox today, if it can stop raining long enough for that to happen. Well, the Brewers 14, the Cubs 4. Perhaps they will redeem themselves today when they play one another once again. And the Clippers 116, the Suns 102, getting closer and closer to the finals in for the NBA. Love it, love it, love it. Investigators are on the scene of the Florida condominium collapse, trying to figure out just what happened, everybody. 11 people are dead, 150 people are missing. People are wondering, is it climate change? More and more people in coastal cities are wondering, are we safe? Is Miami sinking? They saw cracked concrete, standing water days before the collapse um, in the basement and the parking garage of this building. They saw a leak underneath the pool. In fact, the pool in the complex had epoxy, everybody. What happened? What happened? We do know that a lot of souls have gone on to glory as a result of this, and you have a lot of pain family members and loved ones who've been left behind. Was it uh, was it because they were about to have a $15 million assessment? Everybody, $15 million. That's right. And it turns out that these problems had been detected 3 years ago. 3 years ago. The Delta variant, everybody, the threat of the Delta variant has some health officials rethinking COVID-19 measures, even among vaccinated people. Everybody, listen to this. Experts have said vaccines like those from Moderna and Pfizer provide high amounts of protection against the variant, but some warn breakthroughs could become more likely if the virus becomes more prevalent. So please take care of yourselves. Please continue to mask, practice great hand hygiene, be very, very careful. Already in Los Angeles County, officials have reinstated mask guidance for public indoor spaces, regardless of vaccination status. In fact, I've got to go to a wedding in Los Angeles in about a week and a half. And whatever our vaccine status, we're all going to be wearing masks, except for at dinner. In the months since President Trump left office, news audiences have plunged, everybody. And publishers who rely on partisan warfare, well, they have taken an especially big hit. That's right. A group of far right outlets, including Newsmax and The Federalist, saw aggregate traffic drop 44% from February through May compared to the previous 6 months. Lefty outlets, including Weather Jones and Raw Story, saw not as big a drop, 27%, and yet WCPT's our ratings continue to grow. Love it. No reconciliation, no bill. That is what Senator Sanders is saying. The progressive package must come with this bipartisan plan, and in a blow to the GOP narrative, Missouri cut jobless benefits. Well, it's not boosting hiring, everybody. No, people are still not going back to work because they want, I betcha, prosperity wages and not these starvation wages that they had just before the pandemic. Everybody, let's talk about our children. I want you to call me at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. I came across a tremendous article from ProPublica, held back inside a lost school year. They talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. The education reporter for ProPublica, Annie Waldman, does such magnificent work, and she is talking to us about what happened with our children in Benton Harbor, Michigan. In Benton Harbor, Michigan, you know, Michigan has these pockets of prosperity, and they have these pockets of poverty. Pockets that are black, pockets that are white, pockets that are increasingly Latinx. And our children are suffering. The poor, the black, the brown, they are suffering in particular. And what will that mean to us as we go forward? There is a study that just came out. 1 in 5 young adults in the United States are neither working nor studying. Can you imagine? In the first 3 months of the year, about 3.8 million American children, young people, 20 to 24, were not employed, they were not receiving an education, they were not receiving training. That's according to the Center for Economic Policy and Research. That's up by 740,000 people, or 24% from a year earlier. How is that going to impact us? How is America going to win in an increasingly competitive global environment if our children are not working, if they're not studying, if they're not acquiring a skill? And that is what you're seeing with these hardworking young people, these hardworking families in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Annie Waldman has done magnificent work. This piece will absolutely, it will take your heart. They talk about this Ashley Thompson, this wonderful, wonderful heroine, this teacher. Camera, Annie Waldman writes, at the other end of the screen one morning last September was a third grader she'd never taught. To assess his reading, Thompson showed the boy a string of letters, S, B, C. He made a few guesses, everybody, but seemed to only recognize the ones in his first name. Unsettled, Thompson shifted to words that most 8-year-old children can recognize, if only by sight. She enlarged the text and held her pointer to the screen. Of and me, the screen said. The boy's mother sat behind him, encouraging him to read. He grimaced and shook his head. He had never learned how, he told his mother. He had transferred in from a charter school, like many of Thompson's students who'd been in the district for years. He was arriving in her class as though he was starting kindergarten. This is an 8-year-old, everybody. As his mother began to cry, Thompson turned off her camera so they wouldn't see her own eyes glazed over with tears. Annie Waldman, ProPublica, thank you for this brilliant, brilliant report. It almost made me cry, it was brilliantly written. It's written like a novel, everybody. So if you want to get some good reading in and some great information, Held Back Inside a Lost School Year. She takes you through what these hardworking parents and hardworking students, these children, have been going through during the pandemic, if not before. Annie Waldman, welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, this is what is described as being an in-depth portrait of Benton Harbor, Michigan. Describe Benton Harbor, Michigan to us.
So Benton Harbor is about halfway in between Chicago and Detroit. It's about 2.5 hours from Chicago. And it's a city that, is among one of the poorest in Michigan, depressed for decades by discriminatory housing policies, segregation, and deindustrialization. Manufacturing jobs began to vanish in the 1960s and 70s, and that's when white families fled in droves, part of, white flight that impacted a lot of the Midwest. And essentially what happened after that was that the schools were completely underfunded, except they received funding through a desegregation order, which is very, very critical. Many school districts across the Midwest receive funding through desegregation orders that allowed them to create programs like magnet schools that were the pride of the city. And that's what happened in Benton Harbor. But what unfortunately happened as well is that about 20 years ago, Republican Governor Engler, he decided to take away the desegregation order, and that left the district completely impoverished. And so I really wanted to look at Benton Harbor, not just through the lens of the pandemic, but also through the lens of underfunding that has been persistent in the district for years. The tragedy that we're seeing right now is not just the fact that the pandemic is affecting all schools across the country, but it's affecting schools across the country unequally. There were some schools that were better prepared to handle the pandemic than others, and really that comes down to historic underfunding. Schools like in Benton Harbor, some schools like in Chicago were less able to really handle ventilation changes, classroom size changes, or even address environmental factors which have plagued school buildings for years.
We're talking with Annie Waldman, education reporter for ProPublica, about Held Back Inside a Lost School Year. This happened all over the country, but she has taken us in depth into the community of Benton Harbor, Michigan, which she has described as between Chicago and Detroit, and between Chicago and Detroit, not just geographically, in so many ways, right, Annie Waldman? And you get a chance to see the deindustrialization of America when you go to Benton Harbor. You get a chance to see people who have worked very, very hard, but they've lost their schools. The schools are being closed left and right, right and left. But the teachers are getting bigger and bigger classrooms, more and more students to handle. And then you have the Michigan State Legislature, which has enacted a literacy law. What is that?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, under Governor Rick Snyder, who, as I'm sure you're well aware, was involved in the Flint water crisis, what happened was Snyder signed a law that said if third graders cannot pass the third grade proficiency exam by the end of third grade, then they could potentially be held back. And, studies were done. Folks knew that this law would disproportionately impact Black and Brown students across the state, yet it still went through. And they were able to suspend it at the beginning of the pandemic last year. But this year, the law went into effect for the first time. So all of these children who were impacted by the pandemic, many of them out of school, many of them with only a fraction of the school time that they normally have, they are now subject to this incredibly rigid law, which means that they will have to repeat third grade. And the thing about retention is that some people might say, well, if they don't know how to read, they should stay in school. And that's true. If kids don't know how to read, they should absolutely get the resources they need. But retention has been shown to not be effective in actually helping children throughout their education. It lowers their self-esteem, and it also increases their chances of dropping out in high school. So it actually diminishes their ability to receive a complete education down the line.
But when this, as you pointed out, this is unequally distributed. I mean, we see inequality just across the street in St. Joseph, Michigan, right? I mean, explain.
Absolutely.
I mean, because that's the interesting thing about, well, really even about the United States. I mean, when you come through Chicago, you will see everyone remembers the iconic show Good Times. That particular housing project literally was next door to the Gold Coast, which is the wealthiest zip code in Chicago. And you see that replicated all over the United States. You see it all throughout Chicago. Chicago is the quintessentially American city, but you see that everywhere. I mean, we're seeing hyper segregation. You know, segregation is now becoming even more prominent, but you see it in Benton Harbor and St. Joseph. How? What are these two different communities? Benton Harbor is black, St. Joseph
is predominantly white. You're right. So over decades, what's interesting is St. Joseph and Benton Harbor are less than a mile away from each other. The only thing that separates them is the St. Joseph River. But this river has actually come to mark one of the most segregated school boundaries in America. In St. Joseph, if you look at third graders, for example, 63% can read proficiently, compared to in Benton Harbor, it's fewer than 6%.
No. Wait, Annie, say that one more time.
Yeah.
What?
In St. Joseph, 63% of the third graders can read proficiently, go across the river less than 1 mile away. Less than 6% of third graders in Benton Harbor can read proficiently.
How does that happen? How does that happen?
I agree. I mean, when I read this, I was shocked as well. And, the teacher that I profiled in my piece, she grew up in Benton Harbor. She went through its schools. And when she came to be a teacher and saw these figures, the figures stunned her as well. She had no idea that children in her own hometown struggled as much as they did.
So she research, right?
Oh, yeah. She did the research. She pulled the data.
Yeah.
She really looked deep into it. And, when she started to assess kids as they came into her classroom, she was shocked at, the deficiencies, the deficits that they experienced. But she realized that this wasn't because of their parents. This wasn't because of the community and a lack of appreciation for education. It was quite the opposite. Many parents were involved. Many parents appreciated the importance of education. She realized that it was really a system that had been underfunded. The funding had left. The state had not supported it. And instead, the state had blamed the district for its own problems, for its own lack of proficiency, without giving them the tools to actually improve.
That is stunning. I mean, and she's a bit of she's a success story coming out of Benton Harbor herself.
Absolutely.
Please give us a little background on Ashley Thompson.
Oh, yeah. So Ashley Thompson, she grew up in Benton Harbor. She loved the schools. She went to one of the magnet programs that was set up under the desegregation order, and she thrived. She wanted to be a writer. She spent time in the library. She considered herself a bookworm, reading the Babysitter's Club and Goosebumps books. And then, she went to college. She didn't get, so she dropped out after her first year. But a few years later, after she had some kids, she decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to school. I want to learn to be a teacher so she could be a better mom. At first, she didn't even want to teach in a classroom. But once she got to college and she started taking on the classes, and her eyes were awakened to the systemic inequities across the country, and also, the lack of support that really her family and friends and her family members have in Benton Harbor, she decided, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go back into the classroom. I'm going to use what I'm learning to help my community. And that is an incredibly unique thing that doesn't necessarily happen, but she's driven by that mission. And, she brings that to her classroom every single day. Many of the children that she teaches, she knows their parents. She grew up with them. She worked with them. And so, they have that intimacy that I think is sometimes often lost in the classroom, but, uniquely she has captured it in her own classroom.
And in fact, years ago, when I was in school, what was so helpful is that your teachers knew your parents knew your teachers. And if something went awry, the teachers would call your parents, because they knew them. And so in this small community, that's what they have in Ashley Thompson. And yet she's struggling with congestive heart failure. Yes.
Yes. So white people, and this, is a huge problem across Benton Harbor. Many families I spoke with, there's a family member, a couple family members, even children with underlying illnesses, that when the pandemic came, it made it very impossible for them to return to in-person learning. And so Ashley Thompson has congestive heart failure. She was diagnosed with it in 2013. And the summer before she was supposed to start teaching this past year, she had a flare-up and she went into the hospital on the cusp of a heart attack. And her doctor said, you absolutely cannot teach in person. And so she decided she was going to do virtual teaching. So she was one of the only teachers that volunteered. And in fact, she was the only third grade teacher assigned to virtual learning. So at the beginning of the year, she was with 79 students on her roster by herself. It was too much for her to handle. So eventually they gave another teacher to the third grade so she could split her class in two. But that just shows how strapped a lot of these school districts are in really setting up classrooms. There aren't enough staff members to bring the classrooms down to an appropriate size where students can learn.
I mean, and she's also hobbled by the fact that they don't have many, if not most people in Benton Harbor don't have internet access, Wi-Fi.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And this brings us back to our St. Joseph Benton Harbor comparison again.
Mm-hmm.
In St. Joseph, over 90% of the households have internet, whereas in Benton Harbor, 40% don't have high-speed internet, don't necessarily have access to computers. And so when the schools shut down last March, it created an enormous divide almost immediately. In St. Joseph, students and their families were able to get back online, and 97% were online learning within a month of the shutdown. And Benton Harbor took 6 months just to get computers into the homes of all of the families so that they could have a normal school year, a relatively normal school year. And so, they lost 6 months of school compared to St. Joseph, where it was almost like, we're back online immediately.
And it's stunning because you still have this literacy law that's putting these children behind, no understanding of the circumstances of the hurdles that they have to overcome. It should be our takeaway. You've got to come back and talk more about this because this is an American dilemma. My apologies to Theodore Dreiser.
No, absolutely. I would love to come back and talk about this. I guess the bottom line is, there are so many stories out there that are saying we need to get kids back into the classroom. We need to get kids back into the classroom. But I think the most important thing is to really listen to the voices of families, really listen to the voices of educators, and try to understand what is needed to not just catch kids up from the pandemic, but really address the systemic opportunity or systemic disparity that persists in our education system. Right now, we have an opportunity to do that, to not just catch kids up to where they were before the pandemic, but have a national conversation about where the gaps are and how we can actually, provide the necessary resources so that divide between St. Joseph and Benton Harbor, it's not a national issue. Perhaps we can make it a little bit closer.
Annie Waldman, for the work that you do in highlighting this issue. I mean, I was riveted when I read this, and I have to thank Ms. Calderon for making this interview happen, and thank you for availing yourself to us today. Everybody, you've got to read Held Back Inside a Lost School Year. I have it posted in my social media. I've sent it out on Twitter, on IG, on LinkedIn, and of course on my Facebook page on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. Do yourself a favor, read this. This is what our children and their parents are going through as we're looking at more and more of our young people who are not engaged in employment. They're not engaged in any kind of learning. How is that happening? 1 in 5 young adults neither working nor studying in the United States, and that's happening today. What are we going to do? Let's talk with John Nichols, everybody, coming up about India Walton. Who is she? Mayor of the second largest city in New York State. She's also a socialist. Back in just a minute.
Change the world, change the world. We can change the world. We can change the world, change the world.
Hi, Santita. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, wow. You got to come back because that was like.
I'd love to. Anytime.
Oh, that was compelling. I mean, I don't want you to spill the beans on anything. We're on Facebook Live right now. Is there anything? Are you working on something else? This is. But I back to this too again.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping to continue to follow families in Benton Harbor. I'm also going to be kind of looking at other issues that come up in the pandemic, but mostly focused on K-12 schools.
Wow. I want you to do that because it's interesting that that Ashley Thompson, the teacher, one of the heroines in this story, all the parents are as well, that she came out of a magnet school. And I have a particular, that touches me in a particular way because I went to a magnet school in Chicago and they were created to combat the race and wealth gap And and they were created to desegregate because Chicago historically has been the most segregated big city in the United States. And our school, thank you so much, thank you. And our school historically was the up until they started creating others, it was the only fully integrated school in all of Chicago. And that was in the 80s into the oh yeah, oh yeah, 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 oh yeah. So it was a really, 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 really big deal. And these magnet schools, they pull the best teachers, they pull students who test the best for the most part, and on and on and on and on it goes. I mean, and it just lets you know that when they intend to educate our children well, that happens.
Right.
But when they don't intend to, that happens too. So
Right.
this is systemic, and I want to thank you for your work. Thank you for your work. But I want you to come back and talk about this because this is a really, really big issue. Really big issue.
Um,
And Benton Harbor shows it up. Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Annie Waldman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I can't wait to have you back. I'll be following up with Miss Calderon so I can get you back.
Sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much. And give my best to her, please. She's a jewel.
Definitely.
Blessings to you.
Yes, my dear.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I am doing well. Just had a wonderful interview. Got some wonderful information from Annie Waldman. She's from ProPublica, and her article is held back inside a lost school year. And it just talks about how she's following these families in Benton Harbor, Michigan, which is between Chicago and Detroit. And you've got these.
I know Benton Harbor quite well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Michigan's very interesting because it's black and it's real black and it's real white, and now you've got the Latinx community that's coming in. But when I say it's real black, it's real white. You've got these black pockets, and in Michigan, and it's
Also, his name is Patrick. Sorry, not David.
oh okay.
Yeah.
And what is his
Lot of
question?
talent.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. And what is his question?
No, he just wanted to comment on there's going to be a what did he say?
A march.
A march for Medicare for all
Okay.
on the 24th.
I'll tell him I'm going to bring him on immediately. Then we're gonna go right into Mr. Nichols.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you so much.
30 seconds.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Dylan. Okay, but it was a lot, and I'm glad that she's doing great work up there. 'Cause I would go, as my father was preaching, we'd go through Michigan and go to these gospel jamborees, and oh my gosh, that's where the first time I ever heard the DeBarge family was there. Was one of these gospel jamborees. I think it was in it wasn't in Benton Harbor. Battle Creek.
Change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. Morning Stars, continue to like and share on the Santita Jackson Show. Coming to you from WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and my morning stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars, Linear Bob out there in San Jose. Love it. And so many of you, Effie Rolfe, my dear sister beloved, all of you, call me, text me, 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. Of course, GWC Entry Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text. I want to hear your voices too. I'm going to go to, as we go to John Nichols to talk to us about really a shocker of event in Buffalo, New York, the second largest city in New York. They just elected a socialist, a black woman, India Walton, to be their new mayor. Before we get there, let's go to Patrick. He's been so patient. Patrick, what's going on with you today?
Hi, Santita. I appreciate you taking my call.
Of course, no, thank you for calling.
I just wanted to let your listeners know that July 24th There is going to be a Medicare for All march on Washington, D.C., and if they want to look for their city where it starts, they can go to m4m4all.org. It's m4m4all.org. And I know this isn't a political issue. I mean, as you know, there's a lot of Republicans as well that are for Medicare for All. It's like 70-something, 79% people in America that want it. Just for some reason, our representatives aren't moving the ball on it. I honestly believe, just like any other issue we fought for, that we have to get together and show them our numbers. And I hope that people look for that.
Is it for some reason, or do we have the insurance industry and the corporatocracy standing in our way, Patrick? Because I think we know the reason,
I
right?
believe it's. I mean, it's a for-profit system. I don't believe it should be that way. Do you?
No.
I think about your health care, and you think about half of the people that are going bankrupt because of just medical bills. It's sad. It's terrible. And then you got other entities that are taking advantage of that. There's a number of them, but they're not insurance companies, but they rely on other donors or other people that are involved. And a lot of times it doesn't work out. So, I mean, whether it's insurance or it's some other type of organization trying to make a buck, I honestly, we've seen a lot of numbers as far as what the cost will be. And in the long run, it'll cost us, $2 trillion less than our system right now we have. It's just for the basic fact of the issues that the people go through for their health and trying to be covered and fighting with insurance companies. It's not something we should ever have to do. It's just we should be able to. Everybody has the right to be taken care of as far as their health goes, and not be put in the poorhouse, and not be put with a decision whether or not to pay that big bill or not get the treatment at all. I mean, I'm sure there's probably plenty out there. The old man who, he's had a few years on him, and he doesn't want to burden his family with a huge medical bill, and he figures he'll just, he'll go to the wayside to do whatever you can for them. We shouldn't have to make that decision either.
Absolutely, these Faustian bargains that we're having to make about our health care. It's terrible. It's terrible. And it shouldn't be. And we have the power to change it, and I hope that whatever people's political affiliations are, their partisan affiliations, that, there's some things that I think as Americans we need to agree upon are part of the common good. That's the social contract. In your health care, your education, decent housing, healthful food, and the best health care. That ought to be it. That's what makes America great. America cannot be what it's supposed to be when it is the sickest industrialized nation on earth. That's ridiculous. Sending you much love. You sound like you're out, Patrick. Please be careful as you're driving around, okay?
Okay, thank you very much, Santita.
God bless you. Be safe out there in the rain. John Nichols from The Nation magazine. A socialist claims a historic victory in Buffalo. Around remaining rebels and revolutionaries, well, they just put a democratic socialist on track for the top job in the second city in the state of New York, in the Empire State. India Walton. How did that happen? Who is she? Where is this coming from? What?
Hey. And what a fascinating story it is. India Walton is a reasonably young woman. She's in her 30s. She's never been a politician. She was a housing activist and a nurse and a mom. In fact, she was very open about her own story, a lot of struggles in her life. She had her first kid when she was 14. As a teenage mom, she didn't have a car. She talked about how rough it was to, get across town, connect on the buses to get health care and that for her kids. And she also talked about how she made it pretty well, became a quite accomplished nurse, and then became an activist in her neighborhoods. But she was very conscious in, especially recent years, that in Buffalo, her hometown, a city that she clearly loved, there was a real divide developing. Divide between working class and poor folks who lived on one side of town and tended to often be left behind, and sort of a, as we see in so many cities, a redeveloping downtown, a tech sector, things like that. And when she saw that the incumbent mayor, who had served for 4 terms and been quite successful, didn't face an opponent, she decided to mount a campaign against him. Now, when India Walton started running, remember, not a sitting elected official, not a powerful player in the community, neighborhood activist. When she started running, it was so grassroots that she herself went door to door in the winter in Buffalo. And remember, Buffalo gets like 70, 80, 100 inches of snow. On snowy, cold days, knocked on people's doors to get the signatures to get on the ballot. She did get on the ballot. She built this incredible volunteer-driven grassroots campaign. A lot of Black women and young, white, multiracial neighborhood activists, and they were completely dismissed. They were so dismissed that the incumbent mayor never mentioned India Walton's name, refused to debate her, refused to acknowledge that he even had a challenge. And so, you went into the election, there was just this sense, well, it's another noble little effort that didn't go very far. Wrong. On election night, when the first returns started to come in, India Walton was ahead. And as that night passed, she remained in the lead. She won a relatively substantial victory over a 4-term incumbent, and she did so through the whole thing as a avowed and proud democratic socialist who said, look, there are ways to organize the operating of a city that prioritizes people over profits. And it's really quite a remarkable win.
We've got India Walton, we've got Elizabeth Warren, who was a Republican, not right-wing, just middle-of-the-road Republican when we had those. Like we had Chuck Percy in Illinois and Rockefeller and on and on and on, people you could work with. But she is now, she's seen something else, and it beyond switching party. Before she switched party affiliations, her worldview changed.
Well, she was elected she was the Democratic Socialist who won in the Democratic primary.
But what I'm saying,
primarily, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to get at something else because we have these people. We're not afraid of labels anymore. I guess that's my point. You've got Bernie Sanders, who is the most popular Democratic politician, really, and he's almost 80. Elizabeth Warren's in her 70s. You've got basically someone who's very young, who, as Effie Rolfe pointed out, she got a GED. She lived in a group home. She's got several children. But just so that you know, everybody, the studies show that those young women who become teen mothers become the most professionally accomplished people in our society because they have something else pushing them. So that's just something that we should also be mindful of. Don't dismiss them because they have something to push for, and they push and they make it. What is it in her story that you think really was so that people in Buffalo found to be so compelling? Because all these other people have these different narratives that we're not looking at these labels anymore. We want to know what you're going to do.
I think that's exactly right, and I think you hit it spot on. The India Walton story is obviously distinct to Buffalo and distinct to her, but it is part of a fabric we're seeing around the country where there's an awful lot of communities where folks are saying, we've been electing the same people for a long time and nothing seems to have changed. That there seems to be a kind of a status quo, and maybe the Republicans will be in charge and they'll be a little meaner. Maybe the Democrats will be in charge, they'll be a little nicer, but the real change, the fundamental change that gets to systemic racism in policing and other areas, that gets to inequities as regards housing and employment, a host of other issues, that doesn't seem to come. And so I think people are open to an alternative, to somebody who says, look, I've got a different way of doing things. And historically in America, the term socialist, well, obviously 100 years ago, socialists were elected all over. There were socialist mayors, members of Congress, school board members, sheriffs, legislators. But, after the Red Scare and for a long period there, you had a situation where the term socialist was seen as dangerous or threatening or something that people wanted to avoid. Now I think something has happened where, people have come to understand that democratic socialism is not a threatening proposal, but actually a real alternative and one that might do some good. And B, also the fact that someone might be willing to come forward and say, yeah, I'm a democratic socialist. That instead of being seen as a negative is a positive. It's a place where you say, okay, this person is different. This person's willing to take a position to identify an ideology that is often demonized by the Republicans, often dismissed by the media. I want to take a look at that. And we see in the polling that younger people, especially, are very, very open to folks who identify as democratic socialists. That's one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders did so well.
Well, and it's dismissed by establishment Democrats, too, let's be fair, because now we have Team Blue,
yeah,
right?
Without a doubt.
And Team Blue is, what Team Blue is today is to today is what the DLC has been from the previous generation, which was to push back against progressive politics. And so they're walking like a narrow road, but they're getting the votes. I mean, you've got the so-called squad, if you will, the progressives. Their numbers are growing in the U.S. House of Representatives. You have Bernie Sanders, who is the most popular politician really on the Democratic side. I mean, people toggled between Bernie Sanders and Trump. So I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. I mean, so I'm trying to figure out what is a democratic socialist, and I mean, why she was unafraid to label herself thus and run as such.
Yeah, look, a democratic socialist is someone who believes that you can organize government with first priority being on working class and poor folks, rather than first priority being on billionaires, multinational corporations, and campaign donors. And that, at the heart of it, that's a really big kind of focus of it. This basic concept that A, government can do a lot of good, and B, one of the challenges to government doing good is the influence of the very wealthy and the very powerful on the process. And you'll remember, Santita, that back in 1988, when your dad was running for president of the United States, it was a very interesting moment because the group Democratic Socialists of America, which was led by Michael Harrington, the great author of the book The Other America, which really exposed a lot of poverty, and poverty in the U.S., but the group Democratic Socialists of America endorsed your father's campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And there were folks who said, oh, well, he should renounce that endorsement. He ought to not accept it, or he ought to tell him, just keep it on the down low. I don't want to be identified with it. And your dad called up Michael Harrington and said, no, I'm proud to have the endorsement of Democratic Socialists of America, and ran with it, and we talk a lot about how Bernie Sanders made this word, or this term, democratic socialism, more acceptable. Mm-hmm. But really, it was in that 1988 campaign where Jesse Jackson was one of the first people to welcome democratic socialists into that rainbow coalition, and to say that, this coalition will include people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different races and classes, and ideological streams. And it's important to understand this has been a part of America for a very long time. Democratic socialism is not some foreign concept imported from someplace else. The great mayor of Milwaukee Milwaukee itself, the best way to say it is from 1910 to 1960, Milwaukee had socialist mayors. And Milwaukee was thought of as the best run city in the country through most of that period. And in fact, those mayors were pioneering in a lot of the programs and the initiatives they did. And so what I think is happening right now, and I think you see it with India Walton up there in Buffalo, there is a bit of a resurgence of this in a sense. Well, you know what? There may be some ideas here that are really, really useful, really to the good, and they may be the way to break the status quo and start to actually get some things done. And it's notable, the last Democratic Socialist mayor of an American city, of a major American city, even smaller cities like Buffalo, where Bernie Sanders was mayor, but Burlington, where Bernie Sanders was mayor. Mm-hmm. But the last Democratic Socialist mayor of a major American city was Frank Seidler in Milwaukee. He left in 1960. India Walton will be the next one of the 100 largest cities in the U.S. And that's quite a remarkable thing because it is most of those Democratic Socialist mayors in the past were white men. Now you have a black woman, a young black woman, who is picking up on an old American tradition, but updating it in all sorts of remarkable ways.
Do we know that this is an old American tradition, that we actually had many more options almost 100 years ago? I mean, that people, before the Red Scare, if you will, you did have Democratic Socialists. Yeah. You even had communists. I mean, you had people who were all over the ideological spectrum who were responding to sweatshops. What are we going to do about this newly freed people, the black people? Where do they fit into this landscape? Or where do the newly arriving Europeans actually, because black people were getting hired before the newly arrived Europeans because of our skill set and slavery. So there's a lot. We had many more options. What has changed in the landscape, particularly in Buffalo, right? This is like a really middle American city.
Yeah.
What is it?
Somewhat more conservative sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because the great Reverend B.W. Smith was out of pardon me. What is it about her candidacy at this time, John, do you think really sparked this surge of support that she got? Because her numbers were quite impressive.
They were. And I think it's always dangerous to go to one issue and to say, oh, there's only one thing. I think there was a lot going on here. And part of it was just simply the neglect of the campaign by her opponent. But if I could go to one issue, I'd probably go to housing and affordable housing. And if you look at India Walton's campaign platform, it was incredibly well developed in the area of affordable housing and of ways in which the city could buy up or organize vacant lots and then organize development of affordable housing on those vacant lots, of which there are a lot in Buffalo because it's a city that's been hit by a great deal of deindustrialization. And to say that it's possible for the city to play a real role in making housing affordable. Now, that's not a distinct issue to Buffalo. As we look around the United States, what we find is that in all kinds of cities, from relatively small ones to our biggest cities, housing affordability is becoming a huge issue. And it's also an equity issue because we have the reality that people who have historically been denied access to credit, who have historically been denied access to, quality housing, now are being pushed into even more tenuous situations. And so it's a time when interventions have to be made. And that's something that India Walton talked about. Remember, for the last few years, she's been the head of a housing trust, a housing, activism group. And so she was very, very knowledgeable about this, very steeped in the issues. And I think that had a real impact. I actually, when you look at the data from different precincts in different parts of Buffalo, you saw that she broke through in areas that were somewhat more conservative. And you're thinking, well, what is it about a Democratic Socialist that's succeeding in somewhat more conservative areas? And I think it was this housing affordability issue, this notion that, there's a lot of people, Buffalo's got a lot of pride. There's people who love their city, even if they're not the wealthiest, even if they're not the most powerful. Mm-hmm. And they want to stay in their city. They want to thrive in their city. And India Walton, this young woman, said, there's a way we can do that. There's a way we can make sure that Buffalo doesn't become like so many cities, with this very, very prosperous downtown, maybe, the high rises going up in a couple of neighborhoods with nice views, but very little happening for the rest of the city. And she said, no, it is possible to have high quality, affordable housing for the great mass of people, and to address historic injustices and inequities to make sure that housing is available for all. And I think that message, above many of the others, was the most powerful. And I will suggest that if people want to look to a place or something they can learn from the Buffalo result, India Walton's platform on housing it's worth a read. It's a very, very detailed, very thoughtful approach to how to do it.
Well, a tenant's bill of rights. I really talk about the corporate community about 50% set aside of city-owned vacant parcels for the public good. She's doing a lot of great stuff. I've got about 2 minutes. What's our takeaway from her as we move into this period in which we're seeing our voting rights decreased? 389 pieces of legislation over 48 states will decrease our voting rights. I mean, we need to vote, and I think that we are going to vote. But it seems that we're voting the way the establishment doesn't think that we're going to vote. 2 minutes, they belong to you.
Well, you see, and I think you just got to the heart of the matter. I think that one of the reasons there's an assault on voting rights across this country is that there's a tremendous churn in the American political process right now. There's a lot of, kind of unexpected developments and pushes and pulls, and places that didn't used to surprise us are now surprising us. Joe Biden is winning Georgia, so is Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. Joe Biden's winning Arizona. You see incumbent members of Congress being beaten in primaries by folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You see, what have we seen just in the last few years? Our first Muslim women in Congress, our first Native American women in Congress. There's a change taking place, and a lot of the powerful folks, a lot of our establishment doesn't want that. One of our jobs is to celebrate that change, to recognize how powerful it is, and to make sure that we defend the avenues by which people can have a more diverse and more open and more exciting politics. We don't want to narrow politics down. We want to have, good new people coming in, especially younger people who break through the barriers. And so that's a job for all of us to make sure that voting rights are defended, and also that a diversity, a plurality, a pluralism in our politics becomes something that's celebrated, not dismissed or attacked.
Everybody, I remind you to get the book, Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Policies. And if you really want to understand really why a democratic socialist is not a shock to the American system, you need to read this book. This is, of course, John Nichols' latest book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. We've had a lot of different kinds of thoughts, everybody. So India Walton, we applaud her, and we thank God that she's going to be working for the people. Having lived in a group home, having been a teenage mother, having gotten her GED, having been a nurse, having cared for people. So glad for her success and for the success of the great city of Buffalo. I'm Santita Jackson. Can't wait to be with you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. John Nichols, love you, love you, love you, everybody. God bless you. Have a great day. Stay dry. John, do you have anything you want to say before we go?
Well, I'll just say I'm glad we focused on that. It's a that I think surprised a lot of people, but it's a good sign that there's an energy in our politics. There are things happening and things being broken up in ways that are to the good. And I was really glad that we were able to recount the story of when your father rejected the advice to distance himself from democratic socialists and from some radicals, and instead said, no, there's some radicals that have been with us all along, and instead of pushing them away, we're going to start a new politics that says, no, they're welcome. And in fact, you can build a broad coalition that includes a lot of ideas, not a narrow coalition that pushes people away.
Well, I think that the reason Reverend was able to do that was because he was drafted by the people and not selected by the elect, if you will. I mean, he could speak to people. It's when you are selected by the elect that you have to speak for them, quite frankly. And so Reverend didn't have to
Oh,
do
I think
that.
that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was coming out of a different. It was a different route up, right? Instead of being chosen by others, he chose to run, and he chose to run with a coalition that was unexpected and challenging, and maybe even a little bit dangerous in some ways in the views of some of the powerful. And I think that there is a strength that comes from being dismissed or from being treated disrespectfully up front. And the strength of that is to say, okay, if you're not going to welcome me into this process, I'm going to define my own way in. And I think that's in some ways what the Rainbow did.
Well,
There's a lot of people, especially in '84, who were dismissive. And Reverend said, okay, be dismissive. You can write me off, but I'm not going to go away.
Well, the thing is, the people made him run because he was trying to get Andrew Young to run. He was trying to get Maynard Jackson, the former mayor of, may he rest in peace, the former mayor of Atlanta, to run. He felt that they were more establishment figures and that they would work better, that they would read better with the American. They were more mainstream because Reverend was always he was the chief black spokesperson at that point, but he was not. He didn't have. He was more grassroots than they were, and they wouldn't do it. And Reverend, really, up until the summer of 1983, when people were chanting "Run, Jesse, Run," he was asking them to do it. He said, "Look, see, he had become President Carter's chief surrogate in 1980. By the fall of 1980, President Carter was so unpopular he could not go campaign for himself. So Reverend did it. And what shocked the Carter White House was that they would book a place for 500 people, and 5,000 people would show up. They book a place for 1,000 people, 10,000 people would show up, and they were like, whoa, who is this guy? Well, and if you look at the night that Carter lost, Reverend, I think, let him out because, he'd been his lead guy. And even though Reagan had come to then Governor Reagan, but then soon to be President Reagan came by the office to seek Reverend's endorsement, he really was, in light of him opening his campaign, or one of his opening events was at the Neshoba County Fair, Philadelphia, Mississippi, where they killed Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. He and his wife came to the office. He knew Reverend wasn't going to endorse him, but as a courtesy, he came by. Reverend, it was the people who pushed him to run. It was the people who did it. And so he had to follow the people. As he said, my constituency, the damned, the dispossessed, who are desperate and seeking relief. I'll never forget that as long as I live, because that's really what it was. And, when I think of you sitting in the audience, we were all kids then. And when I look at Regina Thomas, who became the Secretary of the Commonwealth of New Jersey, when I think of just all of these people, Abel Mabel, when I think of Cleo Fields, who ended up becoming the first black person elected to represent, to go to Congress out of Louisiana post Reconstruction, who was a kid who was at Southern University. He was president of the student body, and he ended up running for the state legislature and won at 21. I think of all of those people. It was those folks on the bottom, what you didn't know what you were getting into, John. You just said, this sounds right to me. Casey Kasem.
Exactly. And I mean, and you look right now, I'll tell you, tomorrow I'm going to be down in Janesville, Wisconsin, where they're fighting to keep a factory open. And Senator Tammy Baldwin is coming in to meet with the workers, and she's been great on standing up on their behalf. They've taken one of these hedge funds trying to close down a factory and move the jobs out of the country. And Tammy Baldwin, as I said, she'll be there, and she's been really outspoken on this fight. And I was thinking about it the other day. She got her start as a very young woman in her early 20s with the rainbow.
Yeah.
Back in the '88 campaign, she was one of the handful of local elected officials in Wisconsin that supported the Reverend's campaign, and she's always been proud of that. That's something she's always talked about. And she was an out lesbian in her 20s, served on the county board in Dane County, and it's something we forget that at that time when there were many folks who were kind of struggling to break through politically and struggling to open things up, it was the Jackson campaign that said, "You're trying to stir things up? You've got a place with us. You come and join with us."
The Arabs,
and it was that welcoming nature.
That's right. The Arab community had a desk. The LGBTQ community had a desk. Farmers had a desk. Family farmers had a desk. I mean, please. I mean, the people who had been marginalized or they were dismissed or not allowed in, because Arabs had a really hard time. Arab Americans had a very hard time getting into presidential politics. Their money oftentimes was rejected. Who was talking about the Palestinians almost 40 years ago? That was Reverend Jackson. You had a no-talk policy. Who was talking about Mandela? He was still a terrorist. Well, he was a terrorist, according to the United States, into the 2000s. But advocating for the ANC and for the release of Walter Sisulu and Nelson Mandela, that was a principal pole of his campaign. So, and we can't forget that, because it's not just his campaign, it was what you stood for. Because he wasn't alone. And that, I think that's what we have to remember. I think of Casey Kasem and getting a bus on his own and going throughout the state of Michigan, because that is the greatest concentration of Arab Americans in the United States. And without our knowledge, he just rented a bus and went from state to state and started organizing the Arab American community. Yes, that Casey Kasem, America's Top 40. By the way, just trivia, my father married him and his wife, Jean. I think it was in 1979, 1980. Oh, John, I saw that in People magazine. I almost passed out. I was like, Daddy, you married Casey Kasem?
So excited. Yeah.
He said, honey, if I'd known you were excited, I would have taken you. I was like, oh my gosh, I wish you would have taken me. Because I love Casey Kasem. I'm listening every Sunday. I miss the top 10 because that's when church would begin at 11 o'clock. But, I think we're going to have several discussions on my evening show about the rainbow and all the people who were brought in. Barbara Lee, who had been on welfare.
Oh, yeah.
That's how she came in.
It's almost an endless list when you start to talk about it, because if you pay attention, and again, I'll go back to this. When I was writing my book some years ago on democratic socialism, and I did a lot of research on the history of it, and I'll tell you, the 80s were a really complex time because Bernie Sanders was elected in '81. In Burlington. That was a breakthrough win for, opening up a broader ideological debate. But then there were also all the setbacks of the Reagan period. And it's striking to me that if we look at, you go back through the whole history of the country, right? And then you come up to the present moment and you look, where are those pivot points? Where are those critical junctures? And I will tell you, I think when the Reverend Jesse Jackson was campaigning in Vermont, and seeking to win the overwhelmingly white state of Vermont, I believe the whitest state in the country. He had a prominent backer there, and that was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, Bernie Sanders.
That's right.
Who, was outspoken in his support for Reverend Jackson. And I actually think, if you kind of, again, that long arc of history, you can say, well, one of the points where a lot of things bent was there, right? Where you had a Democratic Socialist mayor of the largest city in a small state saying, I support this Rainbow Coalition. I believe in this project. And I think that was important for helping build out the success of the Rainbow up in New England. And it's notable that Reverend Jackson and Bernie Sanders have remained close to this day.
Well, I mean, he was one of only 2 white elected officials in all of the United States white elected officials who endorsed the rainbow. I mean, and that was in '83. And remember the woman punched him in his face?
Yeah, well, he got a little slap of some kind.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was somebody who was really serious.
Oh yeah, with him,
Bernie Sanders for stepping up for the Reverend, and and this is the other thing about it that was very interesting. Bernie Sanders was an independent then; he was not a Democrat,
right?
And there were people that were upset that independents were coming into the Democratic Party to support Reverend Jackson.
Right.
And you think about that. That was one of the sort of crises of the moment, because here was Reverend Jackson coming along and saying, no, there's all these people out there, a lot of them Democrats, but there's some people who've never been Democrats. We can bring them in. We can build this bigger, stronger coalition. And there were people who didn't like that. There were people who said, no, let's keep it small. Let's not welcome anybody new in. And in a way, that's sort of what our politics is always about, this great question of, do you want to put a great deal of faith in the people and try and build things out? Or do you want to narrow, right, and try and win on the margins? Reverend Jackson always preached the gospel that you could win big. You could win with a great coalition that was multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class, and that actually believed in something major. And Sanders preached much the same gospel. And why that's important is that to achieve any kind of fundamental change, you got to go big, not small.
Absolutely.
If you're playing narrow, you're not going to get there.
And you got to go deep. Reverend brought 2.5 million to 3 million people, new voters on the rolls, and he was treated like as an unwelcome guest at the party, literally. And but he kept on going. He just kept on going, and that's what you have to do. But that's really the fight that we have in politics today. That's why I'm saying, everybody and nobody out. And I would say that on the right side of the aisle as well. Listen to the different voices. You shouldn't be threatened by someone on the far right or the far left, whatever that means. Because we end up, if we can just cool the temperatures, we can really speak to each other, and we're going to find some common ground. I promise you. If we establish a baseline of respect and care, if we do that, that's why I open the doors on this show to everybody, because I think there's room for everybody. I'm not the only person God loves. I'll put it that way, but that's what my religion teaches me. So, okay. So, you kind of have to make room for everybody. And the commandment, not the suggestion, is that you love everybody. So let's just figure that out, everybody.
That's right.
Because we are all, as Reverend says, we came here in different boats, but we came here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. How about that? How about that?
I agree. And I think a little bit of generosity, we're told that charity covers a multitude of sins.
Oh, yeah.
And the truth of it is if we are generous to others, and then charity is not just writing a check to some noble group. Charity is also just our humanity, our decency with other people, and our sense that there is, some light within them. And if we understand that, if we go back to that, what a wonderful phrase it is too. Again, charity covers a multitude of sins.
Oh, yes.
The promise of that if we can open our hearts, our flaws become less, and if we welcome others, if we say to others, you can be a part of this. I want you to be a part of this. It's not just being good to them. It's being good to us. It's being good to yourself. You become stronger when you're more humane, when you're more decent, when you're more generous. And it's a tragedy that there are some folks in our politics that don't see it that way, that don't understand that. Because just think of how much greater America could be if we recognized that there really is a light in every individual, and if we strengthen that and raise it up, and don't push anybody aside, don't marginalize anybody, don't disempower anybody, but invite people in.
That's right.
Bring them to the center of things.
That's right.
Give them power. They're going to do good.
That's right. That's right. I mean, my father talks about, he said, don't make Joe Manchin an enemy. No, don't do that. That's not what this is about. Those are not my politics. And I can respect everybody and how we do what we do. But that I don't do that. I don't believe in demonizing anybody. And maybe, and some of that I have to tell you all before I go because I've got a housing issue. Okay, I'm trying not to have a Florida condo issue like we have in Surfside. It's not as bad as that, but we've got major renovations going on in my condominium. The thing is, know that I'm talking to people and you talk to people respectfully. You never know, you just might even make a friend. My father was debating Reverend Jerry Falwell, and this was back in the 80s, the height of, the rainbow and the moral majority. And so we went over to the studio in Washington. Jesse and I were in school. My brother, Congressman Jackson Wright, and I were in school then. We were kids then. And when we walked into the green room, I've shared this story before. Reverend Falwell's son Jonathan was there along with his staff. So you had my father's staff and two of his kids coming in, and the first thing that Jonathan Falwell just bounded over to us. How you doing? He was so warm, genuine, really, really warm, very, very kind, and it set the whole. It set the whole. It set a certain atmosphere in the room. Now, mind you, to be fair, Reverend Falwell's people were not hostile to us because Reverend Falwell was not hostile to us. In fact, Reverend Falwell, through Reverend E.V. Hill, one of the most prominent Black evangelists in the so-called right-wing space in the last century, he reached out to my father, and he was a prominent Republican, and he was telling him why he needed to run, and that he was going to switch party affiliations for the primary season and raise money for him to help him run. And Reverend Hill was very helpful to me because I was very afraid for my father to run. And he sat down with me in Washington one night for a couple of hours to tell me why my father had to run. He talked about his parents being sharecroppers and slavery, and he just went through this whole history and why he was switching party affiliations and why he was going to raise a lot of money, which he did do for him. And Reverend Falwell said, Reverend, Jesse, because they were speaking pastor to pastor, he said, look, I don't agree with your politics. He said, but we're brothers in Christ. And I just want you to know what you're going to do is very, very dangerous. But I want to assure you that, he said, and I know that. He said, I'm going to do whatever I do. I'll never do anything to harm you from my pulpit, which was very, very big. That was huge.
Oh, yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah.
That was huge. I mean, this is someone who preached from Lynchburg, Virginia, and he did not do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were at the studio that night, fast forward a couple of years, it was wonderful to see Jonathan Falwell, and they were very, very warm, and we kind of, did lighthearted jabs as our fathers were debating, and ended up really becoming good friends, dear friends behind that. And in fact, Reverend Falwell helped Jesse and Reverend Watkins, Congressman Jackson and Reverend Frank Watkins, as they were pulling together the book, doing the research for A More Perfect Union, Advancing New American Rights. It was Reverend Falwell who opened the door throughout Virginia, and he personally escorted Jesse through any number of places. So that's why I try to give people space, you guys. I really do.
No, that's in some ways. I mean, I have some faith that we'll get back to that. It isn't going to be easy, but that we will get back to a point where we will recognize that we can have fundamental differences.
Mm-hmm.
We can really disagree about a lot of issues, but that we are perhaps at our strongest when we look for those places where we can agree.
Yeah.
Right? Those small spaces. And one of the places where I have historically seen the right and the left agree is on the questioning of the, frankly, I'll use the term, corrupt center.
Yeah.
The status quo, those with power, to believe that you can solve your problems by, bowing down to multinational corporations and fighting wars, starting wars overseas. And there have been times, Bernie Sanders will tell you that there were times when he was looking for ways to oppose some aspect of militarism where his best ally was a right-winger.
Well, that's what Trump started off on. And Trump stayed true to that. Whatever people say about him, I'm no Trumper, and I shouldn't have to say that.
I know.
But he said, look, aren't you tired of fighting these silly wars? And he did not do that. So I'm just saying, we're going to have to open up our minds and push the people, even those we like and we voted for, we worked for. You've got to push them to do what you need them to do, because you've got these corporate forces and these other forces that are prevailing upon them to do the opposite of what you elected them to do. So the politics ain't personal, and then it is profoundly personal. But don't take it personally, let me put it this way, okay? Just get out there and advocate for you, so you can get if you have who you want, great. But what's most important in politics is to get what you need. Do that. Make sure you do that. And your last word, and I'm going to go so I can speak to someone about a leak I have in my place, in my kitchen.
I hope you put it out well, and I'll be thinking of you. My last word is that, and I say this to you all the time, I really value this show. I think it's really important, and I think the human side of it, and the way that you ask the questions, but also that you bring your insights in, matters a great deal, and I'm just so glad you're doing it.
Oh, you're just the best, really. And it's always so glad that we've had so much shared history. It's been such a blessing that we can do that, because it's like talking with an old, dear, dear, dear friend, which is what you are, my brother beloved, John Nichols, everybody. You've got to get the book, please, so you can understand the sweep of history. You can understand India Walton didn't just come out the blue. She didn't. And she's speaking to our needs. And that, to me, that's the issue. Just we're electing people who are speaking to our needs. I don't care what the oligarchy, what the patriarchal structure says. I don't care what the establishment is saying. People are going and voting their own way, and I love it. I love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
So blessings to you. What do you have on the hopper for this week before we go?
Oh, I am lots of things. I'm writing about a mayor who's in your kind of listening area, Daniel Biss up in Evanston, who was attacked by right wingers who said, "Oh, they weren't having 4th of July in Evanston, like there was some sort of anti-patriotic thing." And instead of doing what a lot of folks a lot of progressives do, just don't pay attention to it or dismiss it or neglect it, he went right at him and used social media, pushed back and said, this is the kind of lie and this is the kind of disinformation that that gets peddled by folks who are dealing in misinformation, and I'm just not going to let it happen. And so he very boldly challenged folks and basically took a stand as a progressive to show that progressives actually are very patriotic and, in fact, believe in a lot of celebrations, if you will, but don't do so unmindfully. And so I'm going to write about him because he's a very interesting fella, and speak up to some of his good spirits. And then in short order, I'm working on a big project looking at where Bernie Sanders is today and what projects he's involved in, and kind of this next stage of his life as chair of a key Senate committee in that.
Well, I love it. I love it, love it, love it, love it. And please give my love to Senator Sanders. I've got to get him back on the show real soon.
Oh yeah, I know he'll do that.
Oh, absolutely.
I know he'll be thrilled to do that.
He's a jewel. He's a jewel. Our blessing. He's gonna keep on fighting just like Reverend. They're both about the same age, and they
they're young men with great futures ahead of them, and they aren't going to stop. Well, you go and get your house, your place straightened out. I know you will, because you're a good advocate, and I will talk with you. Hopefully in short order.
Sending you
before we're on the radio again.
Absolutely, sending you much love and sending everybody much love. Sending you all, hey everybody, I'm going to try and get some rest, D-Ray, but You know, I'm still hanging up my summer clothes. Can you believe it? Summer just came out of nowhere. And so now I've got a pile of clothes and some winter clothes I got to save because I don't want the moths to get them. So I got a lot of stuff to do today. See you, everybody. Love you. Talk to you tomorrow. Love you, John. God bless.
You take care and be strong.
Thank you. Dylan Altoff, thank you for a great show. Have a good one.